Derry.
How has Wise for Africa received these legislative developments?
I mean, we've been at it for the longest of time. It's been a year since the draft bill were tabled before the Portfolio Committee. And a year later, this is where we are. So it's a step in the direction, and they're quite comprehensive. The changes that have been introduced, hopefully they will change how we address gender-based violence in the country. And it's not just civil society, it's almost everyone, including South African Police Service, the South African courts, whether at the regional court, magistrate courts, high courts, and the register itself, the sexual offences register. I mean, many South Africans have been making the call to open up that register to include all sex offenders, and we managed to win that one, and we're now going to have every single individual accused and convicted of a sexual offence transgression included in that registry, in that register, and a member of the public can open up that register and confirm that an individual indeed is in that register, and I cannot employ them, they cannot work with children, they cannot work with mentally disabled individuals, and it also provides how you can remove someone from that register. So it's a victory for many activists who have been advocating for such to happen.
Any other notable changes besides the register?
Another notable change is that now we can, as a victim of violence, if a perpetrator wants to be paroled, I've got a say in whether they should get the parole or not. We had been fighting for that, so we're quite happy with that provision, and the law provides for that you can't just assume that and ignore my feelings and my emotions as a victim of violence once you consider the parole of a perpetrator of violence. So we will have the opportunity as victims of violence to make an input and a submission on whether a perpetrator deserves to be paroled. The other notable significant development in this legislation is that in the Domestic Violence Act and with domestic violence is that you can now give evidence through intermediaries, right? For the longest of time, you've had women not comfortable to go before the courts and present their case. This amendment makes provision for a woman to have an intermediary who can present their case on their behalf. You know that the bill also provides for automation of protection orders that will limit the amount of time it takes for a woman to apply for a protection order. And for those women who can't even travel to different courts in their jurisdiction because they cannot afford, if there's someone who, especially when they work with civil society organizations, they can assist them to apply for a protection order online. It also provides the criminal amendment bill also provide for bail and cancellation of bail in certain circumstances. One of the arguments we've made strongly was that in all domestic violence cases or even any other gender-based violence case that appears before the courts, it cannot be automatic that an individual believes that they can just get bail. The prosecutor must fight for no bail to be given to a perpetrator. And that's a victory for the civil society organizations that fought tirelessly to ensure that provision is included in the amendments. So now it requires prosecutors to be diligent, to fight for the people that they represent, that they will fight for them in ensuring that they oppose bail, and they apply their minds on why a bail is being opposed. And we think it's one of the biggest victory for civil society organizations.
Do you foresee that these requirements and these provisions will be implemented immediately, or will it take time?
I think it's going to take time because you need almost all the government departments to gear themselves and be ready for the implementation. understand that this is still going to the NCOP for ratification and approval. And once NCOP has done that, it still has to go to the president to assent to it, to assent to these amendments, and then they can only be applicable and effective at the point when the president signs them into law. So we still have a long way to go, but I'm hoping that they'll be tabled before the NCOP, sooner rather than later. And before the end of this year, that the departments use this time between now and then, once the bills have been given the go-ahead, they use this time to gear themselves to be ready for the implementation of these bills, because they've got huge implications for the Department of Justice, South African Police Service, and correctional services and social development.
This might be a parliamentary process, but it's part of the promises made in interactions between yourselves and other civic organizations with President Cyril Ramaphosa. Have you changed your stance in terms of his seriousness in terms of solving the gender-based violence scourge in the country?
No, we haven't. The seriousness still has to be demonstrated. I mean, there's the thing about it. I mean, this is a year later. We have been, so when you say, as the president leading this country, and you tell South Africa that gender-based violence is a pandemic, and it should be, and once we agree that it's a pandemic, it should be treated with urgency, right? And we have not seen that urgency coming from the president and his team and almost every South African to ensure that when we recognize that it's a pandemic, it requires urgent intervention. So we still believe that there's more that needs to be done, and it's urgent that all those things are done and are done with urgency, and we have not seen that urgency as yet.
You say you're encouraged by the passing of these gender-based violence laws, but is it enough? Is there more that's needed?
No, it's not enough. I mean, laws themselves are not, they don't resolve the problem. They assist in all of us knowing that once I behave in a particular manner, there are consequences. So it's but one of the many aspects that we need to ensure that we rid our society and the country of gender-based violence. But to deal with gender-based violence in totality, you need to have prevention interventions. You need to have laws that deals decisively with these transgressions. You need research and data to be able to know exactly what is happening in the house, so that your interventions are appropriate and can be effective. You need leadership and accountability, and that's where we have failed dismally as a country on leadership and accountability when it comes to gender-based violence. And once we pronounce on some of these things, legislation, for instance, we need South African Police Service to be accountable. We need those who are responsible for these departments to demonstrate leadership in driving the message that is about gender equality and about respecting the rights of women, because women's rights are human rights. So it's an interrelated, and it's interlinked with everything that we do. We can't look at gender-based violence in isolation of the economy. We can't look at gender-based violence in isolation of health, education. So it's all interrelated, and it requires a coordinated approach in us resolving it.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking to us this morning. And of course, it's an ongoing conversation. But just before we let you go, what projects is Wise for Africa embarking on in terms of the immediate future?
So we're working on what people normally call teenage pregnancy. So we addressing those cases of young girls who have been raped. So that it's not teenage pregnancies, because when your 14-year-old has got a child, and we keep on saying it's teenage pregnancies, that's not teenage pregnancy, it's tertiary rape. So we addressing those cases, and we're going after the perpetrators of those pregnancies in the Northwest, Free State, and Limpopo.
Advocate Madumise, as always, a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Desiree.
Advocate Brenda Madumise is a director at Wise for Africa, and reacting to that development last week, Parliament passing 3 gender-based violence bills. We're going to take a break, but let's just remind you of